Oh, it's 4. Why don't I start by qualifying the audience? So hi everybody.
Hi.
That's a lot more noise than I expected it for. Good. My name is John Mayer. I'm the executive director of CALI. I want this talk to be about some cool things we're doing, some cool things we're looking at doing, and the tentativeness on that could be doing is that I want your feedback. So not just on some of the things I'll suggest that CALI should be working on, but also on any other ideas that you might have. This is an opportunity to suggest, cajole, to push us in other directions. Are you okay with that? Do you feel unqualified to tell CALI what to do? All right, so here's the TLDR. Who does not know what TLDR means? Oh, she admits it. I knew you would have to. It means too long, didn't read. So, like when you get these big, long walls of text, you don't want to read it. This is the TLDR. I'm going to talk a little bit about the redesign of the CALI lesson viewer, seeding the quiz bank, a2j.org, dashboards, and then the ellipse. What is that?
Tilde.
The tilde Swinton in front of those is the things that we're thinking the could be doing ones. Technology competency, gamification, simulations, A2J author, as a chatbot, voice bot, authoring platforms. Norm Gowan is the awesome guy that he is. Syllabus, commons, big data, curriculum. Oh, hi Norm. So yes, I'm going to cover all that in 5 minutes. Here we go. Redesign of the CALI lesson viewer. So this is what the CALI lesson have looked like. What are you saying here? How long has that design been up? Sam, it is. How long have we had the design? Oh, Sam would know.
2000.
Oh man, you're killing me. It is 10 years. That's not too bad. It's been very durable. It's been useful. It works on mobile, but we've decided to do a refresh on it. What that means is engaging a consultant who is basically doing mock-ups for us. This is not final, but the main things I hope you can see are that it looks we've gotten rid of the rounded corners because apparently they're back out. The table of contents is now something that slides out and slides back in. It almost sounds silly talking about these things, right? Interfaces are not to be, parsed in this way. They're to be actually used, and you just have this feeling that this is a better interface. But the big deal about the interface changes is that. They've literally deconstructed all of the parts and pieces, and we're having conversations on each of those individual parts and pieces. And sometimes it gets into very intricate and complex conversations about the goals of these things. So I talked about the table of contents. It's this one that's driving us crazy. So CALI lessons can be scored, but they're designed to be a teaching tool. We don't want the students to be looking up there and saying, how am I doing? I'm just going to keep clicking until I get a right answer so that my numbers go up. We want them to be concentrated on, am I learning? Am I becoming a better person and a better lawyer? But we can't stop students from thinking in terms of number right, number wrong. This has even infected faculty, right? Faculty say, run the CALI lessons, but don't turn it in unless you get 70% or greater. So there's also another angle to this, right? Even though it's not about scoring, scoring is a motivator. And when you're doing the hard work of learning, anything that motivates you to do a little bit better is not necessarily a bad thing. So we want that motivator reminder up there. At the same time, we don't want it to be distracting or the point of doing the material. And we have a further complication in that CALI lessons are not linear. It's not like there's 100 questions, you're at 98, 99, 100, you're done. They're a tree. And sometimes they're a tree with conditional branching, where if you answer a hard question right, it will skip around some easy questions. And so it's hard for us to calculate how many questions you have left, your progress, so to speak. So this is not the final, but we're experimenting with 2 different displays that basically say how many right and wrong you have, as well as that circular display that shows what your completion rate of the lesson is. So in this one, they've answered 3 questions that are scoreable. That's another problem. Not all questions are scored. It's at the control of the author. But they're 25% of the way through the lesson at this point, right? Go ahead.
I just wanted to address something you mentioned earlier about faculty concentrating on the percentage right they get as well.
Uh-huh.
And I'll tell you from my perspective, and if you have a way to make this work better, let me know too. But, they're doing so much in their first year. I use the legal research lessons, a couple of them especially. We use the CFR one, which was very long, and they had very busy schedules. If we don't score it, they just click anything, right, just to get through it.
Yep.
So I'm not as concerned that they got it right, but I am that concerned that they went through and paid attention. So if there's another way to know that they're doing that other than scoring, I would love to know what it is. But in the meantime, I kind of have to do that to make sure they're actually getting the knowledge.
No, completely feel the pain. I mean,
Yeah.
It's not that anybody's doing anything wrong. People are just responding to the environment. But it's up to us to figure out how to design the environment for the goals that we're trying to meet. Norm?
I have been using the Moodle platform to administer quizzes as an alternative to, or an adjunct to CALI lessons. And the thing that I found with the Moodle quizzing is that I can track the amount of time the students take to do the quiz. So if you could incorporate that, that would answer your question.
It sure
So
would.
it's-
In one of our reporting things, I think already, Norm, we've got some time.
No, I don't think it's in anything that we displayed back to the faculty.
Not to the faculty, yeah, I think we do.
Then clearly not obviously enough.
Clearly
Or
not
we want to
obviously
find
enough,
it.
yeah, we need to work on
But
that.
we do have that information.
Yeah, we have that data.
And this is actually going to be almost a refrain, it may come up a couple more times, is that we have a ton of information about what the students are doing with this and either don't have the time or haven't figured out how to pull it back, to display it in a way that would give us some insights into these things, So we're learning more about our own analytic capability as well as being careful about FERPA and issues of privacy and things like that. All right. Of course, the new design will be much better designed under mobile. Some of the question types are horrible on mobile. The drag into category, the drag into order, because you can drag and then you got to scroll, then you got to drag and you got to scroll, and then either horizontal and vertical. So our designers, working with that. This is what some of the example design fixes look like. The yes, no, maybe on the top is the old design. On the bottom, right, wrong, maybe, and the information or the selected one. Some things that we're learning as we go along is that, you can't just do yellow because yellow isn't a sufficient amount of contrast to white to pass ADA or WCAG compliance for colorblind people. We got to do sort of a gold. And I wonder if it's pretty yellow on there. Yeah, it's a little darker, almost a brown. This is almost a brown on my screen. We're using this as an opportunity. The consultant that we're using did a review of A to J author a few months back for WCAG AAA compliance, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Remember that. And so we learned a lot about the zillions of small things you can do inside of the viewer or inside of the code to make it pass much better accessibility guidelines, and hoping to build that into that as well. There's actually a website that they've put up. I wonder. I'm going to alt tab over to it. I don't know. I just wanted to show this. So Amanda, actually Batovi, Mike is here from Batovi. He's our A to J coder, but Amanda is our design person. And so they put up a website with all of the things that they're working on so that we can follow along, showing, this is what alerts look like in the old system. This isn't projecting very well, but you get the idea. This is what buttons will now look like. Oh, lots of different buttons. Checkbox buttons. That's the old way. This is the new way. And I think these are actually live examples. So we can sort of see how they're doing and say, move it to the right, make that bigger. We want that. If they got it wrong, instead of a checkbox, that should probably be an X. There's a million conversations in interface design on this.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew? Well, it used to be you couldn't do all that stuff. You had HTML 1.0 and shut up. And now with CSS and HTML5, you can do so much. I hate it. I hate that we have almost infinite capability to do stuff, because that means we have infinite capability to have to make decisions on these things. I like I like constraints.
The good old days.
The good old days. All right, Shift F5. So that is a work in progress that Sam promises me will be ready in a couple of months, maybe in time for fall. Right, Sam?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Second thing we're working on, seeding the quiz bank. If you don't know what QuizWright is, it's a tool for writing multiple choice questions. The goals of QuizWright are to be super fast, formative assessment. The super fast is not the code running, but the super fast is the faculty just getting in there, slapping out 5 or 10 questions, and then delivering a quiz to their students. It's built on top of the whole CALI author, lesson link, auto-publish ecology, which I talked about in greater depth in the last session. It sort of has 3 big use cases that we can think of. One of them is in the classroom, you can run the quiz and see the results on the instructor screen in real time or just after the quiz ends. You can do it synchronously in distance learning. In other words, if you're teaching a class where you're under the video or the audio, you can send the URL out and you can run the quiz and then you can see the results. So it's just like being in the classroom. And of course, asynchronously, sign a quiz, have the students come run it, and then later go back and look at the results. Wait, did I do that? Yeah, okay. So the problem with QuizWright, or the problem with legal education, yeah, I know, I'm using your lesson.
I recognize that.
So if you want to become famous in CALI, title your lesson with an A at the beginning, because it'll always be the last one you grab screenshots from. No, it's a good lesson. There's a voice.
Yeah, right.
This lesson has 25,000 questions in it. Yeah. The problem with multiple choice questions in the legal education space is there aren't enough of them. Faculty, students, schools are constantly bombarding us saying, do you have more of those multiple choice question M&Ms that I want to eat? Because they want to quiz, they want to assess themselves, and the only way to do that is to have somebody else ask those questions. And if there's only a few, then you quickly become familiar with the ones that are out there, right? And so the ideal thing, I think, is to have a public, open, multiple choice question bank that faculty and students can use for both formative assessment and self-assessment. But there has to be enough questions in the subject areas so that even if you memorize the answers, well, then that's the point of going to law school, is to learn a lot by memorizing lots of answers, right? So maybe more like 100,000 questions, 1,000 in adverse possession alone, or 500, something like that. Well, that's a long-term project. In the meantime, I want to seed the question bank by scraping questions out of the existing 1,000 CALI lessons. There's about 25,000 questions in there.
Sounds right.
That sounds right, yeah. I couldn't find the actual thing, but so I was remembering a conversation. The problem is not all the questions are ideal for a quiz-like environment. The questions in CALI lessons were designed for a teaching situation. So there might be like a really long hypo 2 or 3 screens of reading, and then a question about that hypo, and then maybe another question that says, back in question 3, so in other words, when we pluck that question out, it has no context because the content for the question is back 2 questions earlier in terms of the scraping process. So, there's going to have to be some sort of filter for those 25,000 for the ones that are too long, the ones that are just too simple, the ones that are too hard or don't fit into a quiz model, or that are built more for teaching. There's a lot of questions in our lessons in which the answer is maybe, because law professors, can't decide.
It depends.
It depends, that's right. So
That was the purpose of those lessons, was to have the branching and then have them identify the why it depended.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not, but when you pluck them out of context, they make terrible quiz questions. So there's some work to be done, some curating to do. The overall subject area of these questions is easy, right? It's a torts lesson, that's a torts question. It's a contracts lesson, that's a contracts lesson. The specific topics within it might be a little bit harder. We might be able to figure it out from the name or description of the lesson, but we want to pinpoint, categorize these questions so that because we know that when people are searching for them, they're not saying, I want contracts lessons. Well, what they really want is offer questions or consideration questions or say some legal word that you don't understand, John, questions. I'm not a lawyer. So things like this. This is our subject outline consideration, so it must be contracts. And you can see we have we do know where the lessons fit into the outline, so we should be able to auto tag the questions in seeding these things. This is just adverse possession. There's 9 adverse possession lessons. Do we really need 9 adverse possession lessons?
Yeah.
Sure. We need more. We need more.
I teach adverse possession in evidence because there's some great questions that relate to the hearsay definition implicating adverse possession. 90-some-odd% of the students who take evidence, which is everybody, don't remember or know what adverse possession is and how you determine it.
So, you're throwing them a curveball.
And I hope they learn.
All right. So once you have a bank of multiple choice questions, we need to be able to make them findable. We want to use them to create cross references, which is to say, if you've got a casebook or if we've got our casebooks, I'd like to be able to say at any point inside of a casebook, a chapter or a section, hey, I'd like to see the multiple choice questions that go with that. So I need to be able to tag the questions in a way I can scrape them out and pull them in or go back and forth the other direction. And I'd love to see the analytics once this is up and running, which is to say what questions got used or looked at or were interesting for people, because the spikes and the valleys might be useful information for making content creation decisions into the future. So, need data. So, here's our pop quiz. What can you do with a database of MCQs? What can you do with a database of multiple choice questions? You should have at least 10 answers before we're going to move on.
Build an instant quiz.
Build an instant quiz. All right, that's weak, but we'll take it. What else can you do with a database of multiple choice questions?
Build a midterm.
Midterms? Ooh. But what if it was open to everybody so that they could see the questions before?
John, I'd just like to point one thing out. QuizWright is currently limited to faculty only, and we don't actually have a plan for implementing student access to QuizWright yet.
I know.
So this bank that's getting built will initially be available to faculty.
Okay.
Well,
You're right. I've gotten into the could be doing before I actually meant to get there. But still, what can you do with a database of multiple choice questions? So you can do a midterm. What else?
student practice.
Sorry?
Student practice.
Student practice. Excellent. What else?
Bar quizzes.
Bar prep. Ooh, anybody Anybody want to? Yeah, I agree. Why not bar prep? But writing bar prep questions is different than writing your normal everyday question, right?
No,
No?
no, it shouldn't be.
I'm with you, yeah.
That's like, it depends.
There are certain types of questions that the bar exam no longer use that some professors will use, like they won't use the 1, 2, and 3, which are correct. and
yeah, yeah.
So
The
there are
construction
certain
of questions.
formats that
Sure.
will no longer be used that professors will still use, and there are certain, the bar has a very limited set of standards for the kinds of questions and what they'll test and what they'll use. So it is a narrower set of parameters than what most faculty will use.
It is, but they have a reason for it if you read their literature. And
Yeah,
I kind of agree with Susan Case's
Totally.
stuff, right? Right.
Faculty shouldn't be using those types of questions.
Why not?
The 1, 2, 3, 4?
Oh, yeah, those. I agree.
Yeah, and the reason the bar does it is because their advisor, who,
They don't anymore.
well, he convinced them not to. And he retired not too long ago, but he was
It
consulting.
was Susan Case. I thought she was head of.
Michael
I don't-
Candy was their psychometric person who disproved a lot. Susan was the head of the director, and I want to say it's Mike Candy who was the, but never mind.
All right. Anyhow, what else? One more idea for what you can do with the database of multiple choice questions.
You track how it gets used, how often those questions are asked, and maybe how often they're correctly answered. You can figure out whether they're good or not, or
Yeah, how smart
the
everybody
power
is.
of the database.
Dynamic quizzes.
Dynamic quizzes. What do you mean by dynamic?
Instead of, if you have 4 or 5 quizzes on the same subject, you can make quizzes that just takes questions from multiple, makes them on the fly.
Yes, so great point. So in other words, you could say, hit me with random questions, or you can randomize, or if you build it right, you could say, you could assign 10 questions to the class, but everybody that comes to them gets 10 different questions, or everybody gets the same 10 questions but in different order, or everybody gets them in different order but with the answers jumbled up. There's all kinds of ways there's features around the interfaces that can make this kind of interesting.
John, can you collect stats on it? Can a professor use it to assess, or could we collect over professors as to which issues are more challenging than others, or which are?
All right, which law schools are smarter than the others?
No, I know which.
Gamification.
Well, you got your butt kicked by UDC this week in the multiple choice question quiz.
You said something, Elmer, a while ago that triggered something in me. If QuizWright is available to students, I think that would be really beneficial. One of the things that I do with students who are having trouble with multiple choice testing, I tell them to write their own questions.
Their own question, yeah.
And that, I've had many students over the years thank me for that.
Yep, the old, Harvard H2O did this thing called rotisserie, but it was about peer review of essays. I always thought peer review of multiple choice questions would be an interesting area. So these are the quick ones I came up with. Formative assessment, of course, students and faculty, self-study. Nobody said games. Games meaning motivated learning. So in other words, you could build, with a multiple choice question, you can build, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, H2 Trivia, Jeopardy, bingo, battleship, all sorts of games could be done on top of that. And games aren't a bad thing if they motivate people to do more of that study. And then of course you could do leaderboard, like Yale versus Harvard, or classes. I know I'm being a little silly. I'm a little weedy right now, but you could imagine people at 2 different schools setting it up that way, saying my class is going to go against your class, as a way again to motivate students for learning, if this were available. This is one of my favorite slides. Formative assessment is a muscle, and faculty are a little weak on it, which is why the ABA had to say, would you please use more formative assessment and stop that end of semester high stakes, only one thing to grade on things. And so faculty are on a learning curve. I think whenever a new population is learning about a new concept or technology, You need to give them a flexible and iterative sort of system so that they can play and experiment with it, which is, whoopsie daisy. Which is why I don't want to see silos of projects out there. Things that are locked down, things that are DRM, things that you can't experiment with. And I think that's one of CALI's strengths, is that because we're a consortia, we're not going to try to prevent you from doing something so that when you come back next year as a member, we're instead going to try to hand it off to you. So, seating the quiz bank, A2J.org.
Well, actually, before you leave the quiz bank,
Okay.
well, we're pretty close to doing some testing with. We have 150 SAM contracts questions. So we've built a small bank of contracts questions, and we're going to want some testing on that probably coming up. I know Deb is interested. Anybody else is interested, you can shoot me an email, emasters@cali.org, and I'll make sure you find out about that as soon as it's only going to be a small number, and it'll be contracts questions. But the way that it'll work is you'll see a library of questions. You'll pick it. It'll add it to your personal library, and then you can either use it as it is or edit it or whatever you want to do. So.
Cool. Looking forward to that. A2J.org. So A2J.org is a website where there's nothing added right now. The website that we use for A2J author is at A2Jauthor.org. Anybody not know what A2J author is? Just one?
I don't. Don't raise your hand.
Embarrassed.
You have to be embarrassed. So that's okay. I'll just do the 30-minute pre-seat. So it's here. I'll violate trademark. It's legal aid Zoom.
He doesn't know what Zoom is.
Oh. So legal. So have you ever used TurboTax or anything like that?
No.
You're killing.
He has a bank of auditors, so he's too wealthy.
So it's a software tool that legal aid attorneys use to automate court forms for poor people. So things like uncontested divorce, domestic violence, temporary restraining order, expungement, and a couple of hundred others. We wrote it for under a grant with Legal Services Corporation. There's about 1,000 court forms, legal processes that have been automated. They've been used over 5 million times. It's a very well-kept secret. So it's software that we wrote, but it's also, the first question that should pop in your mind is why would the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction care about access to justice? I mean, in terms of how is this part of our mission? And the answer is it's also turned out to be a great tool for students to learn about the law. Because if you automate a legal process or a court form, you have to understand the law and the ethics and the language and the decision tree that clients or anybody who is dealing with that legal matter have to go through. And that's what A2J author is about. Now, that's the story from 2004 to today. A2J.org is a new website that we'll be launching pretty soon, which will basically be giving away this service for free to anybody who wants to help poor people. In other words, it's not a money-making deal yet. It's a situation where legal aid, court, clinics, student projects can be hosted and run to tackle the access to justice issue.
So let's say you have a landlord-tenant case and you have a poor tenant.
Hmm?
How would the tenant use that, or the lawyer use it to help the tenant?
So theoretically, somebody in that state, because it's everything's got a jurisdiction, will have automated the letter that you would send to your landlord, either contesting being an eviction. It depends on what the situation is, right? And so they would find it either by a Google or some other finding aid, and then they would answer the questions on the form, and out would come the letter that they could then print, sign, and file if they so desire. They are the agent. The
So you
software
all
is
are
not.
doing this?
No, we're the tool maker. We don't design the legal process behind it. That's what the lawyers do. Yes, we've been doing this. It's awesome. So it's a hosted platform for access to justice projects. Anybody working on SRL-facing projects, and it's going to be free. I mean, we're looking at law school clinics, course projects, and so what's cool about course projects is that it even creeps us out of the way of access to justice and into exploring all sorts of other things. You can imagine an intellectual property class saying, well, I'm going to automate how to apply for a trademark or something like that. And there's decision trees all over the place in law for students to do, and that's the future of, in my opinion, of 21st century law practice. Automated, you automate the boring, obvious, automatable parts of practice so that the lawyer has more time to practice at the top of their license on the hard parts that require the human brain to do that. This is experiential learning, A to J clubs, okay, it was late, I wrote that. Innovation labs, hackathons. I hate that there's all these hackathons and all these people show up and they never can find enough programmers because they're asleep. And then they have, sorry, Jake. And then, and I know you would. And then they end up, like not being able to get very far in their project. What if they just need? Because a lot of them end up building like question and answer tools into an app. Well, what if you started on a platform that already had that, and so the lawyers or the law students who were at the hackathon could start that much further along in the process. So this is a graphic that shows the areas of law, and that's a subjective thing. This is a survey we did, and then the 50 states. What we did was we looked at all the guided interviews that had been automated since 2004, and sort of roughed them into these categories, and then graphed them on this thing where the green is there is a form or a guided interview that exists in that state, and the pink, or what horrible color that is on this, doesn't exist. That little red square up there, that's Illinois, which is actually doing pretty good because, we're in Illinois and I worked with the Illinois people very, very early on. But the bad news of this is 10 years of LSC funding legal aid programs to automate the low-hanging fruit. This is low-hanging fruit. Some of these are complicated, but a lot of these are relatively straightforward or easy to automate court forms for SRLs. 10 years of that, and we're still only at like less than 20% done. So, and a little bit of money, a little bit of effort, a little bit of coordination, will do an awful lot of good and provide an opportunity for students to learn. So my goal is students paying tuition to solve the access to justice problem. So that's what we're looking for, is something that we can then start to address that gap analysis problem. I don't have to go into what the justice gap is. You all know about that. These are just some reports. This is some of the graphs of our utilization. We're up over 6 million runs and 3.5 million assemblies. And I think the session next door is about A to J authored, by the way. Did I already say no? Yeah, anyone. Courts, nonprofits, legal aid. The legal education angle on this is, if you have to do this, you get into the policy and ethical issues, you get into key competencies for law practice, and it's often better for the students to work together in teams on this, so teamwork projects. Or to work with people at legal aid, or to work with people at a nonprofit. As you well know, law is a big, wide area, but there's a whole bunch of market verticals in which there's people with intense interest, especially in philanthropy and nonprofit, right? Domestic violence, that's all we do. We want to solve this problem, and so we have great expertise in that. Immigration, huge thing.
How do you keep it up to date with court opinions coming down, legislative changes?
So just like anything, it has to be reviewed occasionally to make sure that it's up to date with the law.
A lot of these areas don't move that much.
Yeah, a lot of them don't. Or actually here, I'm just going to badminton it back to you and say, so how do the courts keep their forms up to date when the law changes? I'm sure they diligently are reviewing their thousands of forms every year. So they're not, right? But the answer is the same thing. Somebody's got to look at the law or document the law in that.
And Jessica, who just showed me, it says that when you write your form, you can put the citation in a tag there so that it's very easy for someone to go back and say, double check this citation, has it been updated? So it is embedded into the program itself, so anyone could come back and do it if you embedded the correct sections to begin with.
Yeah. I would like to write like a shepherdization thing for forms. You know, something that tells me if the law is up to date or when it was last changed. Interesting idea. Basically, A to J author is a decision tree author. That's what's behind these. It's questions that branch. Do you have kids? No? Then I want to ask you about questions about your kids, you know? Do you make too much money? Yes. Well, then you can't do this because you can afford to hire a lawyer or something like that. The goal of the question and answer is to get people quickly and conveniently through the materials. But there's decision trees everywhere in the law. And so I don't think we need AI for this. I don't think AI, the shiny thing, will solve this problem for us either. It's boring. I mean, it's hard work and it's important, but it's kind of straightforward. It's a solvable solution problem. All right, next thing, dashboards, last of the what we are doing. I don't have a lot to say, but I just have that picture. So we recently did a whole bunch of work on a database.
Yeah, that URL is wrong. It's just www.cali.org.
I didn't even mean to put it up for people to use. I just slapped it in there.
Yeah, but it is on www.
It is? All right, yeah. So the thing here is we want to provide not big data. We want to provide data back to individuals about the lessons they run, and then maybe say, well, you've run this lesson, here's the next most likely lesson for you to run. Kind of like an Amazon, if you've read, people who bought this book have also bought this book. But in law or in legal education, what that might mean is if somebody has run a torts lesson, then if you know what approximately week in the semester they're in, and if you know how faculty structure torts as which things they teach which week, roughly, then maybe we can suggest to them that here are the lessons that they might be most interested in, rather than just saying, here's 97 other torts lessons we have, right? Our problem is we have too much information for people to make decisions on. And so if we can intelligently narrow it, then we can hopefully get people to find the stuff and learn faster. At the institutional level, we want to give schools, here's your lesson usage, you know, and by the way, here's how poorly your students are doing compared to Yale. To encourage them to get their students doing better on CALI lessons. And then at the zeitgeist level, this is like the national average or something like that. I don't know. It took a long time we had a difficult project of reconfiguring the underlying database so that we can create queries that are sub 1 second and build these out. And I think we're finally ready to start exploring this. And it's super exciting. So this is kind of cool though, but this is only last 30 days, right? So look what's interesting in the last 30 days. Where does law come from? What does that tell you?
Oh, I know. Summer legal research courses. Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking like students who are going into law school next year are showing up to CALI.
Oh no, not that, not quite that.
Learning legal analysis, yeah. But if you go back 4 months, the top lesson is character evidence. It's like one of the most popular lessons. Plural evidence rule, concept of hearsay.
Yeah, fun fact, that character evidence rule is always at the top of any list that's longer than 90 days.
Yeah.
So, or something like that.
There we go. So now into the things that we could be doing. Technology competency for law students. Let's skip that. No. So many people are bugging me about doing something about this technology competency issue. I'm working hard to try to figure something out. The problem is everybody has a different definition for what technology competency means for law schools. What's your definition of technology competency?
Stay off the disbarred list.
That's actually that's not a bad answer, because it is based on professional ethics, right? It's under the ethical standards rules, right?
So we were talking about in the previous session that the biggest problem is you don't know what you don't know. And so when if the threshold is repeatedly doing something wrong, that if you don't know that it's wrong,
How do you know not to repeat it?
right?
Yeah. Right.
But wait a minute, isn't that part of what teaching law students are about? They never know what they don't know until they start learning it, right? That's all about the critical thinking and when have I learned enough?
But they're in law school, they're not in technology school. So we tend to focus, we need to do a much better job, I'm talking about me, about this area.
All right. All right. So Procertus is a company that sells technology competency training. These are the things they think solve that problem. It's mostly specific skills in Word, Excel, and PDF. Lynda.com is a company that sells videos of people. You don't actually get assessed. You can watch people do software, and there's exercises that you can run on your own, but there's no test in there. And then there's a nonprofit called LTC4, which says, no, these are the things that you need to know about in terms of technology competency. They don't provide any training content. They basically will certify your program once you've got it running, once you've built your own sort of tools. There's a lot more to this conversation, and we had a whole session on it yesterday. And every time I said, okay, so we know this for sure, and people were saying, well, maybe. So this is a tough area, but we're going to be exploring it. Gamification. I've read this book and fell in and love it. It's called Actionable Gamification by Yu-Kai Chow. I've read lots of gamification books, and this one I think laid out why gamification better than any of the others. It's a motivator. He lays out all the motivators, all the different ways gamification motivators work in different ways. He calls this italysis. Oh my God, that's so corny. But it actually kind of works. Is it epic meaning? Is it empowerment? I'm doing this because I want to be a better person. Is it social influence? I'm doing this so that other people will think I'm cool. Is it unpredictability? I like the mystery of it. Is it avoidance? I don't want to screw up. Is it scarcity? There's only one gold badge available here. Ownership, I have a certificate that says I completed it. All these things are different motivators that people use and that game designers use and that anybody uses in websites to get people to complete processes. So I've been reading it. I've been through it once. I've got to go read through it again and generate a bunch of ideas on how we might redesign the whole onboarding process and the whole experience that students have in deciding to use lessons. It's going to be a tough project. Some of the motivators are called white hat because they speak to your higher meaning or accomplishment or empowerment, and some of them are called black hat because they scare you. You're trying to avoid doing a bad thing, or there's not enough of this to be available. You can just Google octalysis and find these things. He explains how gambling happens, how the motivators in gambling, which is a black hat thing, but has anybody ever gotten addicted to one of those Facebook games? I got stuck on software blitz. I said, I'm just going to get the 50. I couldn't get there. I'm like, fine, it's $5. I don't care. I just want to get the 50. And I felt bad. But it worked for them, but it didn't work for me. I'm out of this game because that I was angry that it made me feel that way about the game. And he talks about those sort of motivations. No, nobody's ever been alone here. All right, simulations, video. So it's getting easier to do virtual reality type stuff. It used to be the equipment and the coding for that was hard. The tech is cheaper than ever. The scaling is a little bit hard because not everybody has the right devices. Although, I think I'm sure some of you have seen those cardboard ones that you can just use your phone and drop them in. And we saw yesterday, how many of you experienced some virtual reality yesterday? It was kind of cool. You know what I mean? It's still not quite there. But I still believe that simulations and VR can be done in courtroom situations or in lawyer-like situations. The hard thing here is that writing a good script is really hard. But I'm a little, what's the word? I'm inspired that we can do something fun with this if we have some time. What else? A to J author, CALI author is chatbot, voicebot. So what I mean by that is, how many of you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home? Oh man, I thought this was the tech people. Why don't those who don't? Why not?
1984.
Is that it?
I've read that.
I do not wish my life recorded.
Yeah.
My private life is still
What do you have
private.
to hide?
Lots of stuff.
And she has done very well for a long time.
So I bought one about a year and a half ago, an Alexa, and mostly every morning I wake up and I'm like, Alexa, turn on NPR. And then I walk out the door, Alexa, turn off. Or I use it as an alarm clock. I use it to find out what the weather is because I don't want to even stand up and look out the window. You know, but it's still pretty dumb. You can't get into conversations yet with it. But I looked at the API, or not the API, the development environment, and it's getting better and better and better. Templates, APIs that attach out to other services, like it'll read Wikipedia articles to you, and things like that. That's voice bots. Chat bots is another thing. You all know what a chat bot is? Anybody want to explain what a chat bot is?
I assume it's the kind of thing that comes up sometimes when you visit a website. Do you need help?
Yeah, it's any interface in which a little bit of text comes as a question-response sort of situation.
The majority of those ones that pop up on websites, though, there's actually a person on the other end. Chatbots are completely
Or it's all automated.
Right, where it's
You
automated.
can actually use the same bit of code to do both. There's it used to be API.ai, but they changed the name. And you can create one bit of really simple code that creates a chatbot, a Facebook bot, a Google Home Assistant voice, and a Alexa voice all at the same time.
So you illustrate the problem, right? You can't just build one of these. There's a bunch of ecologies or platforms on which these exist, and there's no clear winner, yet onto how those are. So
There isn't, but fortunately there are tools that make one thing that works on all of them.
yes, and then that's hopefully where things will go. Now I'm interested in this because there aren't very many learning applications of chatbots and voice bots yet, and there are none that are in law, or not many in law. There's LawDroid. Who's the other guy? LawDroid is the one I'm most familiar with. They're kind of hard. Your average faculty member's not going to have difficulty, except Patrick. Is he in the room? Yeah. Patrick will figure them out. He's retiring. And so I'm thinking, if we really want to explore this, we need to have the word author in front of that. And the way to think about this is maybe CALI author or A to J author just has a capability built into it that says, I'm going to convert these questions and answers into these voices and chatbot messages, in these interfaces. It's an interface conversion problem. I've looked into it a little bit. It's not that simple, never is, but it's a fascinating idea that I could get a whole bunch of law faculty writing, Alexa skills that basically say to law students, hey, the final's tomorrow. You want to run a CALI lesson? I think that would be cool. Because if I can build it into something like CALI author or A to J author, I can scale this. And if I can scale it, then I can experiment and iterate on that. People learn faster when you can do things at scale, because that's how you do those. You gotta. It takes two. Okay, sorry. So all that sounds cool, but but one of the big problems is CALI lessons have like a lot of text in them. And Alexa skills aren't like 3 minutes of talking and then a question right now. And so maybe that's because there's a disconnect between that context. Maybe CALI lessons aren't right for this interface. Although I want to experiment with that. And for that matter, with A to J author, even filling out a form like an expungement, which maybe only has 10 or 15 questions, it can get kind of tedious saying, what's your first name? John. What's your middle name? Peter. What's your last name? Mayor. And then,
So a lot of those you could pre-fill.
Well, you would want them built into a thing where the pre-fill happens, but the first time throughs are going to be brutal.
Well, I mean, at least on Google Home, you can get their name if you ask them for permission.
Yep.
So name, birthday, stuff like that. As long as it's in their Google account, they can say, "Do you give me permission to access your information?" And then it just pre-fills half the questions.
I rest my
Exact point.
I love them so much. I brought one with me to use in the hotel room.
Wow.
I have Google Home in my hotel room just because I'm so used to using it in the morning.
There you go. So anyhow, maybe CALI author and A to J author isn't the best use case. Maybe it's the quizzes because they're smaller and shorter. And so you can imagine a law student saying, "Hey, CALI, Alexa, give me 10 questions
Calista.
on Rule Against Perpetuity." What?
Calista.
Calista.
Good market.
Saturday Night Live did like Amazon Silver. Anybody see that?
Yes.
Old people getting the name wrong and asking the temperature to be turned up and Odessa. It was really funny. So I don't know. Maybe the context is better with quizzes, which are shorter and punchier and more interactive. It's the difference between M&Ms and eating candy bars. That's how I sort of see that. All right, we're already done. The syllabus comments. This was my bit. This was a sort of an observation that nobody's ever done sort of like a big survey of all law faculties, collected their syllabi, or collected big data on all the curriculums in all the law schools. Am I wrong?
You are wrong.
I don't know. Remember ALS used to do it.
They haven't done it. They haven't done it in a long time.
That's what I mean.
But there was a major project back in the 70s and 80s to try to do that.
The ABA also does a curriculum survey every 10 years or so. Karen Carpenter out at Southwestern usually chairs it. The last one is about 5 years old, but there is a brochure out. What?
Catherine.
Catherine, I'm sorry, Catherine.
She takes issue with that.
I'm sorry. I got K right? Catherine Carpenter, anyways.
C.
Calm down, Lord.
Sounds like the voice of
Carpenter, not Karen. Karen's with a C too? Catherine's with a C too?
Only just begun with a C.
Someone said in an earlier presentation there was a site, Syllabi Commons, that were collecting these at the Teaching Tech presentation.
Yeah, that's my website.
Oh, well
But I'm just collecting syllabi for people who are teaching tech courses.
Oh, was that?
And that's where this
It was
comes
mentioned
from.
quickly.
No, and that's where I got this idea. I'm like, I would love to scrape or get the syllabi of an awful lot of faculty just for the information it would give me on those other things I was talking about, like when are the specific topics in torts or property or whatever taught in which week of a semester. Can we tie that to suggestion systems and all sorts of things? I don't know.
Lexis is trying to do it right now because they're trying to create case briefs for all the cases that are covered in classes. So some people are less happy to give it out to various people.
And I totally understand that, but I'm one of the good guys.
I'm just saying.
I just had a question before you moved on. Could you say more about the last one? I asked because I used to work in like a research department in a law library, and we would often get questions from like professors and administrators wanting to know, like, could you tell me how many law schools offer this type of course or something like that? So would this be a place where you could...
I get those questions all the time. Yeah, so imagine we did this as a public, an open database of, so who teaches a telecom course? You know, who teaches, blah, 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 whatever that is. You know, right? And I remember that project with ALS, because I actually wrote I was working with Jerry Hess for a while there to try to turn that into a database. We at one point, I think we actually did that project where we sent around floppy disks with a DBase program on it, so they could do the data entry. It didn't work very well. I was going to say.
Imagine why.
All right, so the big picture here, keep on pushing the envelope, doing what is nearly immediately useful. So obviously we'll do things that are immediately useful, but sometimes we want to do things that are not obviously useful right now. A little bit out on the edge there. I want to always design for scale. I don't want to just do one-offs. Quiet, Elmer.
I think I'm always doing things that are nearly useful.
I was going to say, this is literally Elmer's job description. I always want to design for scale. I don't want to do one-offs. I don't want to do something. I don't want to do prototypes. I mean, I'll do prototypes on the path to things, but I want to figure out how I can get 100 or 1,000 people to do something, not just 4 or 5. And I always want to design for agency, which is to say, it's not just something that turns us into the oracle that provides schools with our content, but rather that lets law faculty control their own educational design environments, lets law students figure out how to best consume and control the information for learning. We're not in a lockstep command and control hierarchy system of education anymore. Not that we ever really were. I don't know. So it's a principle of mine that I want to design for agency, give people their own strength, and that means open systems and collaboration and remix and reuse possibilities, which is what we do with our casebooks with that. Hey. And I have 4 minutes left.